What's up guys and welcome back to MoAn. If you guys are new here, then what is up? My name is Erica. Hey, how you doing? Now for the purposes of today's video, we're actually just not gonna do this whole intro sequence, okay? And that's because I know based on the title, you guys are not here for me. You guys are here for Jennifer Saint today because I had the absolute privilege of speaking to her this morning about her wonderful book, Elektra. You guys know if you guys are fans of the channel, and if you're not, well then I'm gonna tell you this right now. I'm a huge fan of the book, okay? I received a copy of the book in November, late November, early December, read it then, reviewed it by the end of 2021, and I have been waiting for this moment to finally get her back on the channel to discuss all the mythology that influenced Elektra. Now there's a lot going on in this book, and so Jennifer and I had a really long chat about not only the mythology of the Trojan War that comes from Homer, but also the likes of Sophocles, Euripides, Aeschylus, all of that sort of jazz. So it's quite a dense conversation in a mythological sense because honestly, I'm amazed at the research process that went into writing a book like this and writing a novel like this. And so I had so many questions for Jennifer to answer. So I'm just going to be rolling into the video today, but just so that you guys know, all of the links are in the description below in regards to buying the book, pre-ordering the book. If you're in the US, it comes out at the beginning of May, whereas if you're here in the UK, it comes out at the 28th of April even. So you guys can find all of the links in the description below, not only to buying the book, but also the Goodreads and to my review up on my website, which is www.moaninc.co.uk. But please do not forget to hit that subscribe button. And for now, I'm just going to roll into the video. So welcome back to MoAn Inc., Jennifer Saint, because you are actually, I think, the first or second author that I've actually brought on a second time with my very strange questions. So thank you so much for agreeing to come back on and to answer all of my very nerdy stuff.
I'm delighted. Thank you very much for asking me.
So why don't we start this whole chat though by having you introduce yourself to everybody in case this is the first time that they're watching one of your interviews or one of my videos, and also talk through Elektra and what that book is about.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So, well, my name is Jennifer Saint. My debut novel, Ariadne, came out in 2021, and I now have my second novel out, which is also a mythical retelling from the perspective of the women who are really at the heart and the centre of the myth, but whose stories maybe haven't been quite in the spotlight before. So Elektra tells the story while the Trojan War is raging in the backdrop. There are three women who are fighting their own battles, and that is Clytemnestra, the wife of Agamemnon, who leads the Greek forces to sail against Troy, her daughter Elektra, who is longing for her father to come back home again, and Cassandra, who is the Trojan priestess whose city is besieged.
Right, so you took on a lot with this. As you just said, there are three different women. So for those people who haven't read Ariadne, highly suggest that you do, by the way, if you haven't. But that had a dual point of view, whereas this book has 3 points of view. So you hop between three different women with three very different realities, as you said, of what's going on with the Trojan War in the background, and Cassandra being in Troy and having to handle all of that from her point of view. There's a lot, basically, to say the absolute least. So what drew you to having Elektra take on the narrative as like a whole for the story to be named after her, but also what drew you to the other two women to really tell their story as well?
So I think if you love the classics, then I think that the Trojan War is always going to be something that you just return to over and over again. It's just such a point of enduring appeal. So, and I definitely always wanted to write about it, but I did want to take it from a different angle. So, there are so many wonderful retellings of Troy, and so many of them modern and recent, that I didn't want to retread the ground that other people have trodden so well already. So, the stories that really, really stood out to me from the Trojan War are the ones that are taking place off the battlefield. And Clytemnestra is probably where it started, because she is such a compelling character in mythology. She's this kind of ferocious woman. She's, a bit of a nightmare for the patriarchy. She is not going to do what she's told, and she is not going to kind of lie down and meekly take the treatment that's doled out to her. So, especially after writing Ariadne, I was really drawn to tell a story about angry women. I think I wanted kind of a bit of a change of tone and pace, rather than the themes of Ariadne, which were more to do with tragedy and more to do with optimism in lots of ways. When I was moving on to the Trojan War, I really, really wanted to grapple with this idea of female rage, this kind of emotion that so often we turn inwards or we direct against ourselves or even other women. In the case of these women, their anger is Well, so definitely for Clytemnestra, her anger is extremely righteous, I think, and extremely relatable. So coming to her seemed like a really natural sort of progression, a really interesting character to get my teeth into. But as I was writing, so I'm kind of planning out and beginning my first draft, Elektra seemed like so much more of a closed off character and somebody who I realised I didn't know anywhere near as much about, and whose story was actually a lot more opaque, a lot more clouded. Her motivations are a lot more difficult to unpick. And I think because she is so intriguing and she's such a kind of difficult character to crack, she just crept up and up through the writing process and became more and more challenging and more intriguing. And that's to kind of get into the bottom of really, why does she do what she does? What is driving her? What are her motivations? How is there this one person in the whole of mythology who loves Agamemnon? Let's find out what's going on there for a start. The dynamic between her and Clytemnestra I found so paradoxical, because Clytemnestra is driven out of maternal love. I think, you know, something that makes Clytemnestra what she becomes is how passionately and ferociously she loves her daughter, Iphigenia. So what goes then so wrong between her and her other children who turn against her, Elektra, Arrestees, and to some extent Chrysothemis, though I think we might talk about her a little bit more later. So that was like a puzzle, you know. In the mythology, this is something where I'm thinking, I don't know why this is happening. I'm going to have to delve right in and try and figure it out. And Cassandra's perspective, I've always wanted to write Cassandra. I want to write more Cassandra. Kind of while I was writing Cassandra's bits, I thought maybe I should just throw this in the bin and just write a Cassandra novel. Because I love her. I think most people probably do. She's got this absolutely fascinating and very resonant sort of plight where she can see so clearly the truth and nobody believes her. She's hysterical. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's a mad woman. Let's just ignore her and ride roughshod towards our own annihilation. It's so frustrating and it's so brilliant. So having her perspective in was something I really wanted to do anyway, but it did make narrative sense to have somebody in Troy, because the timeline is spread over quite a long period of time and over this vast distance as well. So while Agamemnon is at war for 10 years, you do have to have something else going on rather than just Clytemnestra brooding, planning her revenge, Elektra sulking. It would be a little bit of a boring story if I stayed in Mycenae for 10 years. So I wanted to go to Troy as well. And I thought it would be so interesting to see some of the familiar events of the Trojan War from within the city walls as well. I thought that would be a different way to see them happen.
Yeah, and I mean, with what you were saying, like talking about all these different women and talking about like their different perspectives and why they're all so important, that I think what's important for people to know is that they're all not part of the same mythological story. So we don't have them all in one book from mythology. It's not easy for you to rewrite this to just be like, oh, well, there's the story of the three women. I'll just rewrite that, no problem. Like, you had to dive into so many texts for this. It blew my mind, just so that you can see as well and everybody can see again. This is the first copy that I was sent of Elektra in late November, early December when I read it. And these are all the notes of just like, here's the random little notes that I found of the Trojan War. Not even the important scenes. These are the important scenes from the mythology. These are just random things that you threw in. I was like, how did she do that? Like, what was the research process like for this book? Because it must have been crazy for you to organize everything, to read everything, to be like, we're picking this, we're picking that, and put it all into one story. So do you want to talk us through what that whole process was like?
Well, I love the idea that it was organised, because it was not at all. It was complete chaos from start to finish, because that is how I research things. I'm hopping back and forwards all the time. And I think because I'm going in between texts all the time, I think that is because, like you say, they're not all in the same story. I'm taking them from all these different places. And so that's how I kind of weave them together by sort of I don't sort of take one text and get everything from it and then move on to the next one. I'm constantly going from one to the other until they all sort of blend together and then something new comes out of it. So, I mean, definitely Aeschylus's Oresteia was, I'd say, kind of the backbone of the research, and I think you'll find a lot of Clytemnestra comes from Aeschylus's Agamemnon. I mean, there are some sort of direct references that I really wanted to make. I remember reading that play for the first time in college, and the beacons lighting, I think, is the most incredible, powerful, dramatic, visual way to start the play. And so I really, really wanted that in the novel. And then I had to work out how it could possibly make sense, because in Aeschylus, it sort of implies that they sail back from Troy in one night, which is not possible. So I had to kind of try and make the beacons and it's just brilliant, like kind of dramatically. But yeah, when you're working it into a novel, you sort of have to figure out how this could actually happen. So I loved a lot of the journey from kind of darkness into light that takes place throughout that play, and that was something that I really throughout that trilogy. So that was something really important. And the character of Clytemnestra is this very dominant, very powerful woman as well. But then Elektra in that trilogy is quite one-dimensional. So she doesn't kind of play such a sort of pivotal role. So to find more of Elektra, that was when I was turning to Sophocles' Elektra and then Euripides' Elektra. Whereas, as you probably expect in Euripides, I think you have a much more nuanced character. You have somebody who is more conflicted and who has perhaps more context around her to explain what's going on. She's married to this unnamed peasant, but he is very loyal to her and he's not taking advantage of her. So you see her in a slightly more sympathetic way. I think you kind of see her as a more fully rounded sort of woman. I don't know why I forgot the word. But I didn't know, character. So I was kind of going back and forth between those representations in those three different tragedians. I think were really kind of the staple. But then there are elements from the Odyssey, because I think I will probably always put the Odyssey into everything that I write. Especially when kind of bits about Helen, those little fleeting glimpses that we get of her in the Odyssey are so intriguing when she's the men are all weeping over the Trojan War, and so she puts drugs into their wine to sort of soothe them and make them forget.
I love that scene. She just like cannot handle anyone being miserable, and she's like, you know what, just have some of this, let's lighten this party up a little bit.
Let's not dwell on what's gone before. So little snippets like that I find so tantalizing, so interesting, and then you kind of flesh them out a bit and expand on them, and well, what does that tell us about the kind of person she was, and how's that maybe going to inform some of the things that I have her do before in the novel. And then obviously the Iliad was another quite crucial text for what was going on at Troy, and some of those big crucial events that feature sort of in the background of the novel as well. So my research process was to just pick and choose and go backwards and then go forwards again and amalgamate as much of it together as I could into something that then eventually made coherent sense.
It made perfect sense. Like, I was so impressed by what you did. I obviously love Ariadne. Like, as I fangirled last year when we chatted about it, I was just like, this is incredible. But this really blew the research that you must have done for Ariadne completely out of the park, because it was just done. The fact this is only 300 pages and you covered all of that, literally blew my mind. I was like, how in the world? And something that you actually just mentioned, which I did want to ask about, was this unnamed man from Sophocles who Elektra is married to. Now, you named him Georgios.
Yeah.
Right, or if it's Greek, would it be a Haji? I don't know. Either way. So you named him that, but I wouldn't say he brings out a softer side of Elektra, because I don't think she's capable of being soft, but he brought out even a very different side of Elektra, which made her a little bit more relatable and not just this, very angry girl. So why did you feel the need to include him in her story and her part of the narrative? And why do you think he was good because she's so aggressive, to have somebody who's more gentle and more loyal like him to balance her out?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, like you said, it came from that his inclusion as this peasant who doesn't get a name in the tragedies. And I thought that it would make sense to have him be a bigger feature in her life rather than somebody who just sort of pops up at the point where Clytemnestra has murdered Agamemnon, and then they have this problem. What are they going to do with Elektra? So Clytemnestra and Odysseus are in charge, they've taken control of Mycenae, and Elektra is furious and rebellious, and what is she going to do? How are they going to kind of quash her? So in the play, I think the idea is, well, if she's married to a peasant, we're not going to need to worry, because then she'll bear these sort of inferior children who will never rise up against us. So that's kind of how they deal with her. But he doesn't play along with it. He's not going to take advantage of this situation. And that implies that is there some lingering sympathy towards Agamemnon still within the kingdom, perhaps? Why isn't he? He's been given this like kind of young, presumably beautiful or like impressive wife. Why is he going to treat her so kindly and be so supportive of her? Is it out of loyalty to her father, or is there something redeeming in Elektra, like you said, probably not a softer side, but something that people are going to feel some sympathy towards? And if she's a character, if she's one of my main characters, she's the woman who takes the title of the novel, I've got to find something sympathetic in her as well. And I think to see her through Gorgias is like, I hate naming people, because everyone in Myth already has a name, and then suddenly like, oh no, I have to come up with my own name for somebody. And he couldn't be an unnamed peasant throughout the whole book, unfortunately. So he did get a name, which means literally farmer, because he works the land. So that was my naming process. I thought to be able to see her through somebody else's eyes gives her a more sympathetic dimension and makes her more fully rounded, because I think this is sometimes the issue when we're going back to mythology and some of these characters who play a role in a story aren't seen outside of that story at all. So Elektra comes to us in the tragedies as an adult woman, and she's already got all of this rage and all of this fury and all of this desire for revenge, but we don't really know how it started. We don't get any insight into her childhood. So all of that was left for me to construct in a way that I thought would then make sense for her to become who she is. And so to give her a friend, to give her somebody supportive, to give her somebody to actually have a connection with, just allows us to see her as somebody who could plausibly exist, who is this kind of real character that we can understand and relate to a little bit better. And I think to kind of give some credibility to, so in Aeschylus, obviously the chorus of old men are very uneasy around Clytemnestra, and there's this kind of longing for the return of Agamemnon to put things back to the status quo, to restore that. And I thought that Gorgias could also represent that as well, that there is this kind of desire for Agamemnon to come back, and this woman who's suddenly got all of this power to be put very firmly back in her place.
Well, something you said there that actually made me think of another question was about how you had to construct all of Elektra's like childhood basically for us to watch. Like, obviously, as you said, we get her as this older woman in Myth, not old woman, but older woman in Myth, who already has all the rage. And, so we kind of get slotted into that moment where that's the Elektra that we meet. And you got to build her. And what's really funny, not funny as in like, haha, but like interesting about your book was that I could see those moments throughout her chapters where she has these little ticks of like, oh, she's pocketing that one for later. Like these little things that happen with her, where I could just see her building all of this rage and swallowing it down. And I had this question, which I know isn't necessarily a mythological question, but it's more so for you as an author, that why do you think she doesn't just say something at some point when she's having all of those moments? Why doesn't she stop anyone? Why doesn't she just say, oh, I'm not feeling too good about this, I'm going to go and sit in the corner, or something? Like, obviously she has to kill Clytemnestra, has Arrestees kill Clytemnestra by the end of the story, so you are building up to that moment. But why do you think, as an author who sat in Elektra, do you think she had to be so emotionally stunted almost as a character for the story?
Yeah, I mean, I think to end up where she does, and so this is somebody where, like you said, we kind of start with the end point with Elektra, we see what she has become, and to kind of unravel that and make sense of how she becomes that person, then she does have to be incredibly emotionally stunted. And I think there's a lot of freedom in having really nothing about her life before to then kind of decide to build that and decide how that could happen. So having her be a child when Agamemnon goes away, when she loses her father, and to have it coincide with the absolute breakdown of her mother because of what Agamemnon has done, I think to a child is obviously not going to make any sense. And because she's so young, then I thought that it would be very plausible that she would just kind of have this feeling of like, well, once we were happy and my father was here, and now he's gone and none of us are happy, and my mother is like lost in grief and she's detached from us all and I can't get through to her and she's not the woman that she used to be, and all of this must be because my father isn't here, and if he comes back everything will be okay. And I think that is something which, as she becomes a teenager, is again quite believable. I think, the parent who isn't there, if you've got an absent parent, is going to be mythologized and idealized in your head, and everything would be okay if that parent would come back. And the parent who is there in front of you, who's doing all the hard work of raising you, is going to be the one who you kick out against, who I think very much central to who she is that she's a teenager while Agamemnon is away, because he's away for so long. And there's that natural rebellion and that natural kind of kicking back against her mother. And I think she doesn't reach out and talk to Clytemnestra at any point because she's so convinced Clytemnestra cannot understand, which I think is how you feel when you are a teenager about your parents a lot of the time. Well, they can't possibly understand. And Elektra and Clytemnestra are so similar as people. They are so dogged and so determined and so absolutely convinced that they're right, that, they come up against each other, they clash, and they're completely incapable of seeing each other's point of view. And I think Clytemnestra is convinced that she's doing what's best for Elektra, because look what Agamemnon did to Elektra's older sister, sacrificed her as though she was an animal. I've got to keep my daughter away from this man. He can't bring anything good into her life. Whereas Elektra absolutely can't see that. Agamemnon did what the gods demanded he did, as far as she's concerned. And she is, whereas I think, again, quite convincingly in a kind of parent-child dynamic, is the fact that often the child goes in a completely different direction. So whereas Clytemnestra is very powerful and refuses to conform to the kind of what would be expected of her as a woman, then Elektra goes the other way, and she is going to absolutely conform, and she is going to want things to be the way that they should be. So she and Clytemnestra just can't bridge that divide. They just cannot have a conversation where they understand where the other one is coming from.
Well, I think you talking about like Clytemnestra wanting to protect Elektra, but Elektra not understanding that regarding the Iphigenia myth. Do you want to actually talk through the Iphigenia, just her part of the story, so that everybody can know what it is instead of me doing it? Just because that is like one of the most, I think the most barbaric scene in mythology, and just so everybody who's watching knows that it's not us looking back at that and saying that's barbaric. That was the ancient Greeks looking at that saying, look at how barbaric this scene was, because it is something that you get into your book, the whole death of Iphigenia, and it is so important. So why don't you tell us that myth?
So the Greek fleet are all ready to sail from Aulis to wage war at Troy, and there is no wind. And it transpires that Agamemnon has offended Artemis. Agamemnon offends everybody. He's so hubristic, he's so egotistical. So I think that certainly in some versions of it, he declares himself to be a better hunter than Artemis, and that's the version that I've put in. And so Artemis demands a sacrifice, and it is hugely shocking. And why would Artemis demand the sacrifice of a young woman? It's completely horrific and horrendous, and Agamemnon knows that he can't just summon Iphigenia to Aulis and say she's going to be sacrificed. He has to do it by treachery. So he tells Clytemnestra that Iphigenia is going to be married to Achilles, and so Clytemnestra brings her daughter to her own death with no idea, thinking that she's bringing her to this to her wedding, but instead Agamemnon slits her throat in front of the whole army, and it is absolutely brutal and absolutely appalling.
Like, it's horrific. If you guys haven't read it, anybody who's watching, you should just read that myth if you need to read something that is just genuinely heartbreaking. Like, again, for the ancients, for modern people reading it, human sacrifice was not a normal thing at all. Like, this is like the only example of it from Greek mythology, and they condemned it massively. So as a classicist yourself, though, given that you studied classics before you became an author, and also as a mother, did you feel a sense of pressure taking on this scene of Iphigenia being sacrificed on the altar for the Greek ships? Which sounds awful when you say it, that it's like, oh, she sacrificed for wind. Like, ooh.
Yes. So I think as a classicist, yeah, this is such a defining scene in mythology. And when you take on a big scene, you definitely want to do it justice. So I definitely felt that pressure. As a mother as well, yeah, it was difficult to write, and felt really important to write. And so I know that another book that I really loved is Maggie O'Farrell's Hamnet. I don't know if you've read it, but it's from the perspective of Shakespeare's wife, and their son died of plague. So that's a real historical event, and she and that's who the book is named after. Their son was called Hamnet. And I watched an interview with Maggie O'Farrell where she said that she had to wait to write this book until her own son was past the age that Hamnet was when he died. And when she wrote the actual scene, she couldn't be in the house. She had to go and write it, I think she said, in the shed, because she just couldn't bring herself to do it. And I definitely understand that impulse. I think this is one of the functions that myth and storytelling plays in our lives, that it gives us the opportunity to really explore the very depths of human emotion and the extent of our own like worst nightmares, our own fears, our own anxieties. And when you're retelling it, I think it gives you the opportunity to take control of it and to shape it. And actually, I'm writing this, the worst thing that I can imagine happening, but I'm in charge of this because I'm putting the words on the page. And something that sustained me through writing it was the fact that I knew that this was that Agamemnon was going to meet his downfall as a result of this, that he was going to be held accountable, that he was going to be punished for what he does. And that was something that kind of helped me to get through the actual moment of writing the scene. I don't know if it would have been different if my children were girls rather than boys as well. I don't know whether I would have found it. I think when you have myth and it's at that safe remove from your own life because it's magical or because it's the gods or because it's whatever, you really can, it's something that it gives you, that you can, these things that maybe keep you awake in the night, you can turn it into a story and you can experience it, but in this kind of safe, from this sort of safe remove, I think. So I think all of those things are probably at play writing that scene. It's probably the part of the book that I think I'm the most proud of as well. I think I was really not happy with how it turned out because it's not very happy, but I was very glad that I wrote it.
I mean, you should be. Like, literally when I read that scene, I was like laying on my sofa and had to put the book down for like 3 hours. I was like, I need a break. Like, and I say that in like a really like positive way, even though that sounds negative, like, throw away the book. Like, no, it was, I'm so emotional right now that I have to take a break. I went to go and eat something, cried a little bit, and then came back. Because I think, and I don't like comparing modern retellings, but of the ones that I've read, I loved your retelling of the Iphigenia myth and her death like the best. I think that was my favorite one. It really put me in that position when she's like holding her daughter. I was like, ugh, it was literally like watching a train crash or a car crash happen in front of you, that it's like you wanted to keep going, but at the same time you were powerless to stop it.
Yeah, that's definitely that feeling of inevitability throughout it. It's just, it's so tragic, it's so horrific.
So I would recommend, by the way, if anybody's going to be reading this book, then do that with a cup of tea. That scene, when you get to it, you'll know it. To have a little like biscuit next to you, something comforting, because you'll need, if I needed it and I know what's happening, like somebody else is going to be really taken for a ride in the best way again. But something that you said just now about taking the narrative back and you're in control of it. One part of this scene that I adored was how you have this little paragraph where you spoke about the differing myths of Iphigenia's death, and you did it very quickly. Where from Clytemnestra's point of view, you just said, people will believe that this was an option, or that this happened, or that this was told, but I was there and this is really what happened and it's horrific and we have to understand this. So I loved that you did that, because I love when people clarify the myths that they used as opposed to other myths. But why did you feel like it was important to address the differing mythologies around Iphigenia's death in this moment?
But I always try and include as much as I can, and kind of as like as broad a base as possible. And sometimes the way that I do that is to say, oh, some people have told the story this way, like, you know, bards might sing of it this way, but this is how it happened here. And I think it's partly because I like to include as much mythology as I can, and I like to put it in as kind of Easter eggs for people like you who are going to clock it straight away and appreciate it. And partly because really central to the story is that Agamemnon's actions are completely unforgivable. What he does, there is no redeeming his actions and his behaviour. And like you say, it's not even as though human sacrifice would have been more excusable at the time. The only way out of it for Agamemnon is this other version, which appears, and is it Iphigenia in Taurus? Is that how I'm saying it? Is it Taurus?
Oh gosh, pronunciation, I have no idea.
No, okay, good. Where she's swept away by Artemis. So Artemis obviously wants Agamemnon to do this terrible thing for her, but doesn't want Iphigenia to die. So she sweeps her up in a cloud, replaces her with a deer or something like that. And Agamemnon just kills an animal, and Iphigenia is taken off to be a priestess instead. And that lets Agamemnon off the hook a little bit too much for my liking, and definitely too much for this story. And, you know, it muddies the waters around then Clytemnestra's actions, which to me are very clear and very straightforward. So so I wanted to definitely stamp that out, so you're not going to read it and think, well, maybe he didn't really kill her, maybe it was a deer. No, this is his daughter and he does it.
Well, you also did this at another moment. I had to write it down because I wasn't going to remember. But you did this on page 224, not to be exact or anything. But it's the scene where Clytemnestra is talking about this fresco that's on the wall. And she's discussing it's Atreus and Tantalus at a feast. So that's a myth that you can tell us about in a second. But the quote that you said was, "Not the slaughter of the infant, nor the revulsion of the gods. It was not needed. Everyone knows the grisly feast that awaited them." So it's a way of discussing different mythologies, just in a different way, that you have these things that play out on the walls. So for starters, why don't you tell us about the whole myth? Because this is a cursed household. That's something that we haven't discussed yet. That the house of Atreus is doomed from the start because of this whole thing. But also, can you talk to us about how you choose then? So, for example, the death of Iphigenia. Like, why do you choose certain scenes even, to be very bloody, to be very gory, and then you have moments like this where you describe more so, and you explain to us why it's the moment before, because we don't need the actual trauma of the situation.
So the myth around Agamemnon's ancestors is just one of the most gruesome and horrifying of these various cursed Greek families that we have in mythology, and they have a really spectacular kind of backstory. So it begins obviously with Tantalus, and I think we know where Tantalus's punishment perhaps better than his crime, because it's that he's condemned in Tartarus to stand in a lake dying of thirst. Whenever he dips his head for water, whenever he reaches for the overhanging grapes, they disappear, and he can't reach them. So he's forever tormented by thirst and hunger. And the reason that he's condemned to such an awful fate is because as a man, he was a favourite of the gods. He was kind of honoured to share their company. And for some inexplicable reason, he decided that he wanted to test the gods' knowledge, superior knowledge, and that the best way to do this would be to murder his own son, a baby, boil him up and serve him as meat to the gods, who obviously see through it straight away, except for Demeter, who's distracted because she's grieving for Persephone, who's been abducted by Hades. So she takes a bite of this human flesh. And so Tantalus is immediately horribly punished, cast down to Tartarus. The boy is restored to life with an ivory shoulder to make up for the bit that Demeter ate. But he doesn't grow up, he doesn't learn the lesson that his father set as an example of how not to behave, because then Pelops grows up, decides that he wants to marry this particular woman. He murders his rival in a particularly hideous way by sort of getting an accomplice to help him and promising as a reward that the accomplice can spend the wedding night with this poor woman. He then murders his accomplice. pushes him off a cliff, and incurs another curse on the family as this man Myrtilus is dying. He curses the line of Pelops again. So they've already been cursed because of Tantalus's actions, doubles down on it. And then his children, we have Atreus and Thyestes, and the third brother as well, who they murder. Once you've done that to your sibling, you can't really trust each other. So then they're rivals for power, and they variously do awful things to each other, sleep with each other's wives, and in the end, so I always have to get it straight. Who feeds whose children to who? Atreus murders Thyestes' sons, not Aegisthus. He escapes, or is born later. Feeds Thyestes' sons to him at this kind of let's have a nice banquet to make friends again. But this is what he's done, and then he whips off the serving platter lids, and he sees what he's done. So it's an absolutely horrific myth, and you can kind of understand why Agamemnon is so terrible. These are the people from which he is descended. This family who have kept incurring the wrath of the gods, who are kind of doomed to commit this terrible violence against one another and then be punished for it, and then create this kind of sort of amplified curse reaching down the generations. So it foreshadows what Agamemnon is going to do. So it's a really important story. But I don't tell it directly. I don't put the reader in the scene, like you said. Because I think partly, as I was telling that myth, it's so lurid that I think it's very easy to kind of for it to lose its impact, for it to lose its power, because it's such a grisly kind of story that I think you run the risk of making it ridiculous if you are really trying to go deeply into the story. So I have it in the novel as this background, that almost like ghost stories that you're being told, and she doesn't see the risk to her daughter, the risk to her own children, that there's this kind of, you can see it as a curse that's been passed down. I suppose if you're trying to see it in a kind of a psychological way, you could just see that this is intergenerational trauma. These are people who have grown up in violence and keep inflicting violence on one another. And she doesn't take that as a warning. She thinks, no, this is just silly stories. So that's why they're not foregrounded. I think you do have to pick and choose, because I want moments like Iphigenia's death to have this power. And I think if you have too much of that throughout the novel, then you're gonna become desensitized. The bits that really, really matter, they need to exist on a sort of a separate plane to these other stories.
Well, there was also a scene that you didn't get into as well, but is referenced. It's a very commonly known, I would say, maybe among classists. I don't want to assume that everybody knows it, but it's Cassandra getting, I can't say this word because YouTube will flag this video if I do. So she gets assaulted by little Ajax. Most people don't even know that there was a little Ajax and a big Ajax, but anyways, this guy called Little Ajax, he has his way with Cassandra in the Temple of Athena. Now, this is very popular and very well known to us classists because it appears on pottery like this. I will include a photo in the video so that you guys can see it as well. But you use this exact pot, like you describe this exact moment where Cassandra goes through that, but you don't describe the nitty-gritty of the actual scene of what ultimately happens to Cassandra. So my question for that one was really, I guess, why did you feel the need to include this scene? Because most people would know her, as we said much earlier, as being cursed by Apollo and nobody believing her. And I don't know if everybody knows this part of her story. So why was it so important that you include it? And why did you step back from the gore without there being blood in that scene?
Yeah, and actually that just, when I was talking about research, I was only talking about textual research, but that's another really important thing that I use as well, would be things, vase paintings, classical paintings, sculpture, visual representations and art as well. And that scene, I think is so horrifying, not just because of what Ajax is doing, but also the way that Athena, so Athena appears in similar stories because it's obviously also Medusa as well, the way that Medusa is transformed into a Gorgon by Athena for a similar reason. because she's offended by this happening in her temple, and she's so revolted by what's happening that she doesn't help Cassandra. Her revulsion is not out of sympathy for Cassandra, and she just turns her eyes away. The statue turns her eyes away so she doesn't have to watch, and then she punishes the Greek fleet afterwards. So part of the reason that I thought this was a really important scene to include is because the main theme of the book is this idea about justice and retribution and revenge. That's the theme kind of running throughout the whole thing, and the fact that Athena has her own retribution on the Greek fleet. She sends a storm, and the ships are sunk and they lose the treasure, and little Ajax suffers this particularly gruesome, horrible death, as is well deserved. So to have the goddess's revenge in there as well fitted with the rest of the novel. But also, I think, particularly when it comes to the myths of Troy, they are stories of such complete devastation and such complete annihilation. And the gods, although they're sort of very involved, and they're even in the battle scenes, but they're still always at this remove. Whereas in Ariadne, she marries a god. She marries Dionysus. He's right there. You can see him. You can touch him. He's a character. He's got this kind of fully developed personality. But in the myths around, the Trojan cycle, the gods seem to be at this kind of step back, even though they're influencing and they're igniting the whole war to start with, and they're coming onto the battlefield and fighting alongside people. They are so opaque and they're so unpredictable, and it's these kind of selfish whims that they have, and it's all about their own sort of status and ego and grandeur, and the people are just obviously pieces to be played with, like kind of just pawns in their overarching game. And I think that is something that's so exemplified by this scene, where Athena hates what's happening, but not out of any concern at all for Cassandra, and she doesn't care what happens to Cassandra, and she doesn't care, and none of the gods do, what's happening to all the Trojan women across the city and what is going to happen to them. It's only that this particular moment takes place in her temple, and that aspect of war is just, it's so painful to think about, to write about, to have in the novel. But it's something that I don't think you can shy away from. And there's that kind of contrast between, okay, well, that happens to Cassandra and there is some retribution, but all of those other women, they get no justice. And that is part of the novel as well.
Something that I was just thinking about as you were talking about Cassandra, though, in particular, was that she's a very feminine character in your retelling, as well as in Greek mythology. And that sounds really weird for people who don't understand what I'm about to say, but like, she's a very feminine character. She's a typical woman of what we would expect her to be, despite her being cursed and sort of babbling in the corner then, and ultimately just spewing the truth, but nobody believes her. Whereas you chose to take her on, and then you have Clytemnestra and Elektra, who are very masculine characters to the ancient audience. And I mean that not in the sense that we understand necessarily masculine and feminine today, but in a sense that literally they used masculine words to describe these women that you wouldn't normally use in the ancient Greek. So was that difficult then for you, hopping between those two types of characters when you have your writing and when you have your different perspectives? Was it difficult to go from Cassandra, even though they're all punished and they all sort of react to the situations happening around them in, well, Elektra and Clytemnestra in similar ways, as you were saying, was it difficult to hop between, okay, this is feminine and this is masculine, or this is very dominant characters, I would say, and then you have a more submissive, that's what I was looking for, character?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that actually is really helpful when you have multiple perspectives in a novel. I think to have that very clear difference, that very clear shift in my mind, as in that now I am occupying somebody who thinks and behaves and feels very differently and is going to react very differently to similar things happening. And actually, I think that is a good thing to make their voices more distinct. So I think that was an advantage of having Cassandra to break up between Elektra and Clytemnestra, because, like you said, they are similar. And that's a really interesting way of looking at them. And I suppose the way that they take action is, I suppose, the way that men would be taking action. You know, they're not afraid to kind of get their hands dirty.
That's something that I like about them in the ancient myths, though, is that they are very much like, they think of an idea and they both just do it. I don't agree with what they do, but they are very much like, it's acting, rather than the other women who, you know, Helen, for example, is one of them that she just kind of goes along with things that are happening. She's acting in a way that we would expect of those times a woman to act, whether we agree with her or not, is something entirely different.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, another woman, actually, just thought of, another woman that you wrote of in the household who's very different and is very feminine in comparison to Clytemnestra and Elektra is Chrysothemis, who you mentioned earlier. Now, most people don't know that she exists. Like, she pops up very briefly in mythology. I think literally to say, I'm not taking a side, I'm going to go and sit in the corner. Like, she pretty much doesn't want anything to do with this whole issue that's going on with her whole family. So why did you include her, and why did you feel like she deserved to have a place among all the other women? Again, you wrote so many women, but among all of them, why did Chrysothemis have a seat?
So I didn't want to write her out because she exists. She's you know, she's there in the story. So I wanted her in there, and she's really useful in, I think, explaining Elektra a little bit more as well. She's the path that Elektra doesn't take. You can kind of see Elektra has got options. She doesn't have to do what she does. The reason that Elektra does what she does, I think, is because she's Clytemnestra's daughter through and through, and she can't not. But, you know, she could have been like Chrysothemis, and she could have accepted what was happening and gone along with it and lived quite a peaceful, happy existence. Well, happy, we don't know. But, you know, certainly not one full of murder and revenge and bloodshed and all the rest of it. So I think it was important to have her in there to show that Elektra did have choices. She didn't have to do what she chose to do. She chose to do it. And it also increases Elektra's isolation, that she has got a sister who has gone through the same thing as she has, who has, you know, they've both lost Iphigenia, they've both seen the transformation in Clytemnestra, they're both the daughters of Agamemnon, and he's not there anymore. But there's no sort of mutual understanding. Kind of Chrysothemis is sort of saying, you know, just get on with it. This is the way things are. And that just pushes Elektra further and further into a corner and makes her less willing to reach out to anybody else, I think, as well. She's only got Georgios. He's the only person who understands. You know, my own sister doesn't understand what I'm going through, and she's been through it as well. So it puts her more and more just on her own, at odds with everybody else.
I never thought about that. Like, I've never considered that perspective of like a sister who we don't see in mythology actually playing a role for Elektra as well, even if not an active role. But in a way that made me think of how in mythology, which maybe again a lot of people might not know, I don't want to assume anything, but that Helen and Clytemnestra are sisters as well. So they grew up together. We don't get that in mythology. We hear none of that. We just hear reference to them being sisters. So how do you think that relationship impacted how Clytemnestra acted in her later life, or do you think it didn't?
Yeah, I think it's important. I think there's such an interesting sisterly relationship because they're twin sisters, but they have different fathers. So Clytemnestra is completely mortal, and she's born normally, whereas Helen hatches from an egg because she is the daughter of their mother, Leda, and Zeus, who appeared in the form of a swan. Of course, he did. So I love that kind of inequality between them from the very start. They're twin sisters, but look, this one is so special and, you know, half divine and magical and so incredibly beautiful. And I think that's got to impact Clytemnestra and the way that she sees herself and the way that she sees the world around her. So I found that quite an interesting thing to explore. And then the idea that, you know, this sort of very misogynistic narrative that the Trojan War is all Helen's fault. She's run off with Paris, and so therefore what can they do but send 1,000 ships to go and get her back? And obviously that's not the motivation for the war. They want to go to war because they want all kinds of other things, but Helen's a very convenient scapegoat for that. But for Clytemnestra, the Trojan War is about this one girl, and that is her daughter, who dies first. And there's got to be something in Clytemnestra that even if she's not going to blame Helen for starting the war, there is some sort of feeling there that I lost my daughter, and Helen is in Troy all of this time, and she's left her own daughter behind in Sparta. And I think that even if Clytemnestra doesn't blame Helen, that divide between them, that inequality between them, is just reflected throughout their whole lives, that Helen gets to come back and have this successful homecoming and be reunited with her own daughter, and Clytemnestra can never have that again. And so I thought that was a very intriguing sisterly dynamic as well.
I have never thought about the whole daughter thing either. That's really interesting. I want to go back and read all of that, because you're right, Helen does come back and she does have her daughter then, and she's been gone for 20 years according to the Iliad, depending on which version you read. It could just be 10, but she's been gone for a significant amount of time, and yet Clytemnestra is the one who was always with her family. She didn't actually act out of line before Agamemnon did what he did, so she did everything she's supposed to do, and she gets punished with not having a daughter. That's harsh. Goodness. Okay, well, my last question, though, off the topic of sisters, is actually about Arrestees, because we can't do this whole interview without talking about Arrestees, because the final scene of your book is so powerful. Like, the last 2 or 3 pages is Arrestees killing Clytemnestra. I'm not ruining anything for anybody, by the way, in regards to the book, because this is mythology. So this isn't like a massive spoiler moment. This is 2,000 years old. So we have this moment happen, and you spoke specifically about the Furies coming, which again, this is mythology. The Furies coming to torment Arrestees, and the final scene of the book continues and all of this. But I want to focus on this moment with Arrestees and the Furies, because you told a woman's story, but you had it end more so with the son and what's going to happen to him, which we hear from myth, and then that continues. By the way, for anybody who wants to continue reading what happens to Arrestees, you can go and read the plays. We get that whole thing in the trial there. So why did you choose to have Arrestees be really the final character to sort of continue the story, if that makes sense? Like, so that we know the story continues with him rather than with the women, because all of their stories get closed off by the end.
Yeah. So because it ended up being Elektra's story, and like I said, when I started writing, that wasn't really clear to me that it was. That's something that kind of grew in the writing process. That, to me, is Elektra's most powerful moment, where she has achieved the one goal that she has set herself in life is done. And it's a bit of a reverse of what normally happens, because the person who's going to pay the price for that is the man, is Arrestees, is her brother. The Furies don't come for Elektra, they only come for him. He's the one that wielded the sword, he's the one that did it. But he's very much, she's almost kind of a little bit Lady Macbeth in the way that she is urging him on and inciting him to do it, and that she isn't going to be tormented for that. She isn't going to be punished. And I just found it very, very fitting for Elektra to finish by leading him away, by helping him up off the ground, and she's going to take him away, and the madness has descended on him, but for her everything is very clear, and she's finally got that moment of closure with her mother in that kind of moment at the very end. And that's it. And she's satisfied. She's done what she set out to do. And so I think whatever happens after that is just not as important to Elektra, because that's what she wanted to do.
Thank you so much for joining me again on the channel, Jennifer, for discussing your beautiful book. And thank you for sending it to me early, because I've had to literally keep my mouth shut for so long. Just like, I want everyone to read this like now.
Oh, amazing. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for reading it, and thanks for having me back on the channel. It's been so fun to chat to you.
So again, look in the description below for all of Jennifer Saint's links, and we'll be seeing everybody next time for more videos here on MoAn. So we'll see you then.